Hello, everybody. I want to do another installment on the book of Joel. This will be part 3, and I'll call it The Loss of Meat and Drink Offerings. The meat offering and the drink offering is cut off from the house of the Lord. The priests, the Lord's ministers, mourn. The field is wasted. The land mourns, for the corn is wasted. The new wine is dried up. The oil languishes. Be ashamed, O ye husbandmen. Howl, O ye vine dressers, for the wheat and for the barley, because the harvest of the field has perished. The vine is dried up, and the fig tree languishes. The pomegranate tree, the palm tree also, and the apple tree, even all the trees of the field, are withered, because joy is withered away from the sons of men. Joel 1, 9 through 12. In the Spirit of the Lord, Joel calls for mourning, and not just because of the locust plague and the coming series of foreign invasions that Judah would suffer. Underneath those calamities, the prophet calls for us to mourn and lament the condition of worship. Judah had the temple, the house built for the name of God, and to her was vouchsafed the worship, the ministry of mercy, and the apparatus of sacrifice. Meat and drink offerings typified this. The meat offering was a bloodless sacrifice. It was actually a grain offering consisting of flour, oil, and frankincense. Leviticus 2, verse 1, which accompanied the morning and evening sacrifice, along with the drink offering. Bread and wine were the meat and drink offering to God. This visitation coming would literally interrupt the daily fellowship and worship of God. The locusts would devour the grain fields and the vineyards, which would allow the nation to offer the daily worship. Joel is predicting the unthinkable. The temple would be destroyed, and the worship of the holy nation would grind to a halt. All of the beautiful fruits that God had blessed Israel and Judah with, in the land flowing with milk and honey, would be languished, withered, and destroyed. No wonder the priests were called to mourn, and the farmers and vine dressers were called especially to weep and howl. Judgment was coming, and it would be felt on every level of society. The shepherds in particular, that is, the priests and ministers, should call a solemn assembly for the purpose of weeping, fasting, and seeking God. Gird yourselves and lament, ye priests. Howl, ye ministers of the altar. Come lie all night in sackcloth, you ministers of my God. For the meat offering and the drink offering is withholden from the house of your God. Sanctify ye a fast. Call a solemn assembly. Gather the elders and all the inhabitants of the land into the house of the Lord your God, and cry unto the Lord. Alas for the day of the Lord is at hand, and as a destruction from the Almighty shall it come. Joel 1, 13 through 15. For Judah to be cut off from the service of worship and sacrifice and the ministry of mercy would be a disaster. The commentators Keel and Delich say, now Israel could not suffer any greater calamity than the suspension of the daily sacrifice, for this was a practical suspension of the covenant relation, a sign that God had rejected his people. The day of the Lord is at hand, the day of direct intervention of the Almighty into the affairs of Judah and the surrounding world. Verse 12 could be interpreted, turn pale, you husbandmen, howl, ye vine dressers, over wheat and barley, for the harvest of the field has perished. Typologically also, the grains and foods which were to be wiped out by locusts, leaving starvation and disease in their wake, point to the destruction of the standard of teaching in the churches. Part of our current judgment in the church is the attack and destruction of sound biblical teaching by which to build up the true flock, and the failure of priests, i.e., pastors and teachers, to be faithful to the word. This is a judgment in itself and is bringing judgment on all of us as well. Of course, a good many professing Christians wouldn't have it any other way, for they eschew true God-centered preaching, and they hate prophecy and the call to repentance. The wheat and barley were the most important of the field crops. The farmers, i.e. pastors, ought to weep in shame for playing at teaching instead of truly feeding the flock. People come to church desperately needing a word from God in our current application, and time and again all they receive is pop psychology, false prophecy, and levity. We are in the famine Amos warned of. Is not the meat cut off before our eyes? Yea, joy and gladness from the house of our God? The seed is rotten under their clods. The garners are laid desolate. The barns are broken down, for the corn is withered. How do the beasts groan? The herds of cattle are perplexed because they have no pasture. Yea, the flocks of sheep are made desolate, O Lord. To thee will I cry, for the fire hath devoured the pastures of the wilderness, and the flame hath burned all the trees of the field. The beasts of the field cry also unto thee, for the rivers of waters are dried up, and the fire hath devoured the pastures of the wilderness. Joel 1:16-20. Where is the grain? Rotting under untilled clods of dirt, while the people starve in the day of calamity. Where are the barns and storehouses, i.e., true churches, the pillar and ground of the truth? Well, they've been broken down and neglected. Everyone wanted to go bigger and better, or as one pastor told me, we're going young. The beasts, that is the oxen, the true laborers, groan. The flock has scattered and is desolate, but they do look up and cry out to God. At least a lowly and obscure remnant does.